Hey nerds. Postmodernist learns of the nature of things from a Nazi and a Catholic. How are you doing, nerds? Let's do a philosophy deep dive. John D. Caputo is a postmodern Christian. I've been doing a series on his book called The Prayers and Tears of Jacques Derrida, Religion Without Religion. Derrida was a 70s so-called post-structuralist philosopher. He's often lumped in with my favorite 70s pervert so-called post-structuralist philosopher, Foucault. They're both endlessly strawmanned as postmodernists by pseudo-intellectual crackpots like former clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson and former mathematician James Lindsay. Foucault and Derrida endlessly disagreed with each other and they focused on different topics. Derrida was more interested in language, while Foucault studied history. Both wrote a lot about culture. Way more intelligent people than Peterson and Lindsay call Foucault and Derrida post-structuralists because they break down or deconstruct institutions of the modern era in Western culture, rhetorically and in writing. These institutions include religion, science, governments, etc. Crucially, though, both Derrida and Foucault had heard of neither postmodernism nor post-structuralism when each were asked about them separately. Dumbasses like Lindsay and Peterson believe that Foucault and Derrida literally want to destroy institutions of the modern era. Derrida and Foucault are merely criticizing them. In Present Tears of Jacques Derrida, Caputo gets into Nietzsche's concept of difference. Most people know about Nietzsche. He's the famous 19th century German existentialist philosopher who went crazy. To oversimplify, Nietzsche's concept of difference kind of means more different than different. Since Nietzsche was basically a militant atheist before it was a term, he'd be rolling in his fucking grave at the thought of what Derrida did with difference. Derrida turned difference on its head in order to describe God as different, or more different than different. He used deconstruction to completely flip difference so he could define God as what I call indeconstructible. This means incapable of being deconstructed. So, to Derrida, since God cannot be deconstructed, God is indeconstructible. Like I said, Nietzsche is rolling in his grave at the thought of this. Anyway, Caputo wrote another book called Heidegger and Aquinas, an essay on metaphysics. I've talked about metaphysics many times before. It's essentially the philosophical study and speculation about the cosmic nature, structure, and function of the universe thousands of years before astrophysics existed. Metaphysics gets into abstract concepts such as the nature of God, being, substance, time, space, and or knowledge slash epistemology. I've mentioned Heidegger a fair bit before. He was a 20th century atheist philosopher who did a lot of work on phenomenology and metaphysics, much more so on phenomenology than metaphysics. I've also talked a bit about Husserl before. He was a 19th and 20th century philosopher and mathematician who founded phenomenology and was a major influence on Heidegger. Many people know that Husserl was Jewish and Heidegger was literally a Nazi. Even though neither of them really wrote about politics, Heidegger never defended Husserl during the Holocaust, and they were both Germans in Germany at the time. This is in spite of the fact that Husserl was such a huge influence on Heidegger. Anyway, to oversimplify, the school of phenomenology that Husserl founded was basically the study of consciousness and our first person experience of it. Thomas Aquinas was a famous 13th century Catholic scholastic theologian and a priest who founded his own theology called Thomism. So, yes, in Caputo's book, he is comparing the metaphysics of the 20th century atheist phenomenologist Heidegger with that of the 13th century Catholic theologian Aquinas. Caputo also gets specifically into being as well, with a capital B. Clearly, Aquinas was more directly involved with metaphysics. Heidegger studied being in the realm of phenomenology, being or Dasein. He uses a capital B because to him, being is a state. We pretty much inevitably look at being through the lens of our experience as beings with a small b. To Heidegger, we are beings experiencing being. Being is just a state, kind of like existence. Being would be even if there were no beings to be. You see what I mean? There would be being even if there were no beings to experience being, according to Heidegger anyway. Caputo wants to learn something about the nature of things from the similarities and differences between Heidegger and Aquinas's thoughts on what Caputo calls being and the quote problem unquote of metaphysics. Let's see where he gets and what he can learn.